Lieutenant Commander Preston Hawk Blackwood's voice dripped with condescending amusement as he leaned against the bar at Murphy's tap, his seal trident gleaming under the dim lights. The off-base military hangout buzzed with the usual crowd of Navy personnel, but all eyes had turned to watch the unfolding drama. Scarlett Scar Thornfield looked up from wiping down tables, her striking blue eyes meeting his mocking gaze. Her porcelain skin, dotted with natural freckles across her cheeks and nose, caught the neon glow as loose blonde curls framed her face, despite the messy high bun. At 5'6", she appeared almost fragile next to Blackwood's imposing 6'2" frame. "I don't have a rank, sir," she replied quietly, her Russian-accented English barely audible above the bar's noise. Blackwood's teammates erupted in laughter. Chief Petty Officer Rourke Tank Garrison, built like a linebacker with arms covered in seal tattoos, slammed his beer bottle down. "Civilian playing dress-up in a military town," he sneered. "Probably thinks watching Navy movies makes her one of us." Scarlett continued her work, methodically arranging chairs with movements that seemed almost tactical. Her posture remained relaxed, but something in her positioning kept potential escape routes clear, her weight balanced on the balls of her feet. These details went unnoticed by the rowdy SEALs, but Master Chief Thaddeus Ice Morrison, nursing his whiskey in the corner booth, felt a familiar prickle of recognition. 28 years in special operations had taught him to spot certain things. "Answer the question properly when a superior officer addresses you," Blackwood commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. But the next 20 minutes would shatter everything he thought he knew about rank, respect, and the woman quietly serving drinks at Murphy's tap. The tension that followed Blackwood's demand hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Scarlett's movements never paused as she continued clearing tables, but Morrison noticed how her eyes performed what appeared to be a tactical sweep of the room. Not the nervous glancing of someone intimidated, but the calculated assessment of someone cataloging threats and assets. "You know what I think?" Blackwood pushed himself off the bar, his voice rising to ensure the entire establishment could hear. "I think we've got ourselves a wannabe. Some little girl who moved to Coronado thinking she could play military dress-up and nobody would notice." Tank Garrison stood up from his table, his massive frame casting a shadow across Scarlett's workspace. "My buddy here asked you a question, honey. In the real military, we call that showing respect to your betters." His voice carried the casual cruelty of someone who had never questioned his right to intimidate others. Scarlett paused in her cleaning, straightening to face them both. When she spoke, her accent seemed slightly less pronounced, as if she were concentrating on something other than hiding it. "I apologize if my response was inadequate. I work here as civilian staff." "See, that's where things get interesting," said Petty Officer Zane, wire cross, emerging from the pool table area with his laptop bag slung over his shoulder. The tech specialist's reputation for uncovering stolen valor cases had earned him a following on social media. Because somebody matching your description was asking very specific questions about base security protocols last week, questions that civilians shouldn't know to ask. Morrison's grip tightened on his whiskey glass. Cross was fishing, but the question itself revealed operational awareness that made Morrison's instincts sharpen. In his peripheral vision, he caught Scarlett's micro-reaction, a barely perceptible tightening around her eyes that suggested the accusation had hit something real. The bar's atmosphere had shifted from casual harassment to something more systematic. Other patrons began pulling out phones, sensing drama worth recording. Jake Murphy, the bar owner and former Navy corpsman, continued polishing glasses, but Morrison noticed his increased attention to the developing situation. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding," Scarlett said, but her choice of words carried a formality that didn't match her waitress persona. Morrison had heard that particular phrasing before, in briefing rooms where diplomatic language masked operational truths. Blackwood stepped closer, invading her personal space with practiced intimidation. "Here's what's going to happen, sweetheart. You're going to produce some identification, and we're going to verify exactly who you are and what you're doing, asking questions about military installations. If this kind of military arrogance makes your blood boil, wait until you see what happens next. Hit that like button right now to support the quiet heroes who hide their true power. Subscribe and hit the notification bell, because this story proves that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody notices. Your support helps me bring you more stories of hidden warriors walking among us. Is that standard procedure for interrogating civilian employees? The question slipped out before Scarlett could catch herself, and Morrison recognized the tactical error immediately. She had just revealed familiarity with interrogation protocols. Tank laughed, but it held no humor. Interrogating? Lady, this is just a friendly conversation between patriots and someone who might not be who she claims to be. Cross had already opened his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Scarlett Thornfield, you said? Let's see what the databases have to say about that. Ember Vasquez, another server who had been wiping down the bar, paused in her work to watch the confrontation unfold. Her expression showed concern for her coworker, but also confusion about why these Navy personnel were treating a civilian employee with such hostility. You seem nervous, Blackwood observed, though Morrison noted that Scarlett's breathing remained controlled, her stance subtly shifting to what looked like a defensive position. Honest people don't get nervous when asked simple questions about their identity. I'm not nervous, Scarlett replied, and Morrison caught the slight edge that crept into her voice. I'm evaluating whether this conversation serves any legitimate purpose or if it's simply harassment. The word choice struck Morrison as significant. Military personnel were trained to de-escalate situations using specific language patterns, and Scarlett's responses followed those protocols almost textbook perfectly. Blaze Radar Garrison, a Navy linguist sitting at the bar, had been quietly listening to Scarlett's responses with professional interest. Something about her accent patterns had caught his trained ear, the way certain consonants were pronounced with precision that suggested formal language training rather than natural acquisition. Tank moved to block the exit, a casual repositioning that looked accidental but effectively trapped Scarlett between the bar and 3 hostile operators. You know what I learned in Buds? He said conversationally. How to spot people who are pretending to be something they're not. And sister, you've got all the tells. Cross looked up from his screen, confusion evident on his face. That's weird. I'm not finding any records for Scarlett Thornfield in any of the standard databases. Social Security has an entry, but the background details are thin, like really thin. Morrison felt his pulse quicken. Thin background records in government databases usually meant one of 2 things. Someone was using a fabricated identity, or someone was operating under official cover that required minimal digital footprint. Both possibilities made this situation exponentially more dangerous. Dr. Patricia Wells, the base psychologist who occasionally visited Murphy's tap for off-duty relaxation, observed the confrontation with professional interest. She recognized the behavioral patterns displayed by all parties, the escalating aggression from the military personnel, and the controlled responses from someone trained in conflict management. No records, Blackwood repeated, his voice taking on a predatory satisfaction. Well, looks like we've got ourselves a genuine mystery. He turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've discovered what they call stolen valor in action. The accusation hit the bar like a physical blow. Stolen valor, falsely claiming military service for personal gain, represented one of the deepest violations of military culture. The mood shifted from entertainment to something approaching mob mentality. Scarlett's response was immediate and telling. Instead of the indignation Morrison would expect from a falsely accused civilian, she became perfectly still. Not frozen with fear, but motionless in the way that predators became before they struck. That's a serious accusation, she said quietly, and Morrison caught the subtle shift in her accent. What had sounded Russian now carried undertones of something else, something trained and precise. Serious accusations require serious investigation, Cross replied, his fingers dancing across the keyboard. Let's dig deeper and see what other databases have to say about our mysterious waitress. Wyatt Torres, Sterling Walsh, and Knox Rodriguez, 3 retired Navy veterans who were Murphy's tap regulars, exchanged glances at their corner table. They had served long enough to recognize when a situation was escalating beyond casual harassment into potentially dangerous territory. Morrison made a decision that would change everything that followed. Setting down his whiskey, he stood up from his corner booth and walked toward the confrontation. 28 years of service had earned him respect throughout the community, and his presence immediately shifted the dynamic. Gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a senior enlisted man who had seen action in places that didn't appear on maps. Perhaps we should consider whether a public bar is the appropriate venue for this type of investigation. Blackwood's jaw tightened, but he couldn't dismiss a Master Chief without losing face in front of his men. Master Chief Morrison, with respect, this appears to be a matter of operational security. If we have someone using false credentials to access sensitive information, then it becomes a matter for proper channels and appropriate authorities, Morrison finished. Not a kangaroo court in a civilian establishment. The intervention created a moment of pause, but Cross's excited voice broke the temporary peace. Holy cow, this gets even more interesting. The deeper I dig, the weirder this gets. Her employment records show she started working here 6 months ago, but before that, he looked up from his screen. It's like she didn't exist. Tank cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the sudden quiet. People who don't exist usually have something to hide. Question is, what are you hiding, sweetheart? Morrison watched Scarlett's reaction carefully. A civilian would be showing fear by now, confusion, anger at the accusation. Instead, she appeared to be calculating something, her eyes moving between her interrogators with what looked like tactical assessment. I moved here from overseas, she said finally. Immigration records can take time to integrate into domestic databases. It was a reasonable explanation, but Morrison caught the careful phrasing. She hadn't said which country, hadn't provided details that could be verified or contradicted. It was the kind of non-answer that trained operatives used to deflect investigation without technically lying. Cross's laptop chimed with an incoming search result. His face went pale as he read whatever appeared on his screen. Guys, he said slowly, I think we need to step back from this. What did you find? Blackwood demanded. I'm seeing flags in the system, like serious flags, the kind that suggest we're looking into someone we shouldn't be looking into. Morrison felt his blood pressure spike. Database flags meant intelligence community interest, and intelligence community interest meant that 3 junior SEALs were stumbling into something far above their clearance level. The advanced tactical communication systems used by elite military units required sophisticated encryption technology capable of functioning in hostile environments. Professional-grade secure communication devices provided real-time voice and data transmission with military-standard encryption protocols. These specialized communication platforms offered complete privacy protection for sensitive conversations, featuring noise cancellation technology and battle-tested durability that exceeded civilian-grade equipment standards. But Blackwood, driven by pride in the presence of recording phones, pushed forward. Flags or no flags, stolen valor is stolen valor. If this woman is impersonating military personnel, it's our duty to expose it. Scarlett finally spoke, and Morrison noticed that her accent had almost completely disappeared. I would suggest that you consider very carefully whether you want to continue this line of inquiry. Idinari. The warning, delivered in perfect, unaccented English, sent a chill through Morrison's experienced instincts. That wasn't the voice of a frightened civilian. That was the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life-or-death situations. Tank, either not recognizing the danger or too committed to back down, stepped closer to Scarlett. Is that a threat, Princess? Because where I come from, threats require follow-through. Ember Vasquez moved closer to the confrontation, her loyalty to her coworker overriding her concern about antagonizing military personnel. She's never bothered anyone here. She works hard, keeps to herself, and treats everyone with respect. Nobody asked you, Tank snapped, his attention briefly diverted from Scarlett to intimidate the other waitress. Morrison caught the micro-expression that crossed Scarlett's face when Tank threatened Ember. It wasn't fear or concern, but something much more dangerous. Professional calculation of threat levels and response options. What happened next unfolded so quickly that the recording phones would need to be slowed down frame by frame for viewers to understand the sequence. Tank reached for Scarlett's arm, intending to physically restrain her for questioning. She moved. The movement was economical, professional, and devastating. Tank found himself face down on the floor, his arm twisted behind his back in a control hold that Morrison recognized as advanced close-quarters combat technique. The entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds. The bar fell silent except for Tank's labored breathing and the sound of his beer bottle rolling across the floor. Scarlett released him and stepped back, but her stance remained ready for additional threats. Holy cow, someone whispered from the crowd. Phones that had been recording for entertainment were now capturing something entirely different. Morrison found his voice first. Ma'am, he said formally, recognizing that the situation had just shifted into territory requiring protocol and respect. I think it would be advisable if we moved this conversation to a more private setting. Blackwood's face had gone through several color changes, but pride and the presence of witnesses prevented him from backing down. That was assault. Cross, call the MPs. I want this woman arrested for assaulting a member of the United States Navy. Belay that order, Morrison commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos with 30 years of authority. Cross, close that laptop and step away from whatever database you've been accessing. Cross hesitated, torn between following his officer's orders and respecting the Master Chief's experience. The hesitation cost him the choice as Scarlett spoke again, her voice now carrying unmistakable command authority. Petty Officer Cross, I strongly advise you to cease any further database inquiries immediately. What you've already accessed may have consequences beyond your security clearance level. The formal military address, delivered with perfect knowledge of Cross's rank and the implications of his actions, struck everyone present like a physical blow. Morrison felt pieces clicking into place in his mind, forming a picture that made his hands shake slightly as he reached for his phone. "Who are you?" Blackwood asked. And for the first time, uncertainty crept into his voice. Scarlett looked at each of them in turn, her blue eyes holding a hardness that Morrison had seen before in operators who had survived missions that officially never happened. "I'm exactly who I appear to be, a woman trying to do her job without interference." "This is nonsense," Tank growled from the floor, where he was slowly picking himself up. "Some Russian chick with martial arts training doesn't make her special operations." The comment about her being Russian made Morrison's blood run cold. If Cross's database searches had triggered intelligence flags, and if Scarlett was indeed Russian, then they were potentially dealing with a hostile intelligence operative. But her combat technique, her bearing, her knowledge of American military protocols suggested something else entirely. Dr. Wells approached the group, her psychological training giving her insights into the behavioral patterns she was observing. "Gentlemen, I think we need to recognize that this situation has escalated beyond casual confrontation. Everyone involved should consider the potential consequences of their actions." Morrison made the call he had been dreading. The number connected him directly to base security, and he spoke quickly but clearly. "This is Master Chief Morrison. I need an immediate security consultation at Murphy's Tap. We have a situation that requires command attention." While Morrison spoke, Cross had been unable to resist one more database query. His laptop screen suddenly went black, then displayed a message in red text that made him push back from the keyboard as if it had burned him. "What is it?" Blackwood demanded. Cross's voice came out as a whisper. "The system just locked me out. Complete denial of access. And the message says, any further attempts to access information about this individual will result in immediate investigation for unauthorized intelligence gathering." The implications hit everyone simultaneously. Database lockouts at that level meant one thing. Whoever Scarlett really was, she was protected by classification levels that made their SEAL clearances look like library cards. Blaze Garrison had been listening carefully to the exchange, his linguistic training allowing him to pick up subtle details in Scarlett's speech patterns. "Her accent," he said quietly to Wyatt Torres. "It's not consistently Russian. There are undertones of formal military English, like she learned it in an official training environment. Are you catching the unusual details in Scarlett's responses? Comment below if you can guess her real background. Veterans watching this will definitely recognize these signs. Share this story with your friends who need to see what real strength looks like." Morrison ended his call and turned to face the group. "Security is sending someone to assess the situation. Until they arrive, I suggest everyone calm down and avoid any actions that might escalate things further." But Blackwood's pride had been wounded in front of his men and an audience of recording phones. "I don't care what databases she's protected by. Actions speak louder than clearance levels. If she's really military, she can prove it." Jake Murphy, who had been watching the confrontation with growing concern, moved closer to his employees. As bar owner and former Navy corpsman, he felt responsible for their safety and increasingly concerned about the direction this confrontation was taking. "Lieutenant Commander," Jake said, his voice carrying the respect due to rank but also the firmness of someone protecting his establishment, "I think this has gone far enough. Ms. Thornfield is a valued employee, and I won't have her harassed in my bar." Blackwood turned his attention to Jake, his frustration seeking a new target. "Stay out of this, Murphy. This is military business." "This is my business," Jake replied firmly. "And right now, you're disturbing my customers and threatening my staff." Ember Vasquez had moved to stand beside Scarlett, showing solidarity despite the obvious risks of antagonizing Navy SEALs. The gesture wasn't lost on Morrison, who recognized genuine loyalty when he saw it. Cross, despite the database warning, had reopened his laptop and was attempting to access different systems. "I'm going to try the immigration databases," he announced. "If she really came from overseas, there should be records." "Cross," Morrison warned, but the petty officer was already typing. Scarlett watched Cross's efforts with an expression that Morrison found deeply concerning. Not fear or anxiety, but the kind of patient observation of someone watching predictable events unfold according to plan. The laptop screen flickered, then displayed another warning message. Cross's face went white as he read the text. "It's telling me that any further attempts will result in immediate contact with my commanding officer and initiation of a security investigation." Blackwood, increasingly frustrated by obstacles to his impromptu investigation, made a decision that would define everything that followed. "Fine. If databases won't give us answers, we'll get them the old-fashioned way." He pulled his sidearm from its holster, not pointing it at anyone, but holding it in a ready position. "Field strip this weapon. If you're really trained military, this should be elementary." Morrison's training kicked in immediately. "Blackwood, holster that weapon. This is a civilian establishment with non-military personnel present." "It's unloaded," Blackwood replied, though he made no move to comply. "Standard training weapon. If our mysterious waitress is really who she's pretending to be, she'll have no problem demonstrating basic weapons familiarity." The sight of the weapon changed the atmosphere in Murphy's tap dramatically. Conversation stopped, patrons moved away from the confrontation, and several people headed for the exits. Jake Murphy reached for the phone to call local police, but Morrison caught his eye and shook his head slightly. Scarlett looked at the weapon with an expression that Morrison found deeply concerning. Not fear, not uncertainty, but the kind of professional assessment that suggested intimate familiarity with not just the weapon type, but potentially with the specific modifications visible on Blackwood's service pistol. "That's a Sig Sauer P226, she said quietly. "Standard Navy issue with aftermarket night sights and extended magazine. Field stripping requires removing the slide, barrel, recoil spring, and guide rod in sequence." The detailed knowledge drew sharp intakes of breath from the watching crowd. Morrison felt his suspicions crystallizing into near certainty. Civilian gun enthusiasts might know basic weapon types, but the specific modifications she had identified required hands-on experience with military-issue firearms. Dr. Wells observed Scarlett's reaction to the weapon with professional interest. The woman's body language had shifted subtly, suggesting not intimidation by the firearm, but evaluation of its tactical significance and potential applications. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "Knowing specifications is different from demonstrating competence. Show us." Sterling Walsh, one of the retired Navy veterans, spoke up from his corner table. "Lieutenant Commander, I don't think this is appropriate. You're intimidating a civilian employee with a service weapon." "Nobody asked you, old man," Tank growled, still nursing his bruised pride from his encounter with the floor. Scarlett took the weapon, and Morrison watched her grip, her finger position, the way she automatically checked the chamber, despite being told it was unloaded. Every movement spoke of muscle memory, developed through extensive training. The field stripping demonstration that followed would be discussed in military forums for months afterward. Scarlett's movements were fluid, economical, and faster than most instructors could manage. The weapon came apart in her hands like she had been working with that specific pistol for years. 18 seconds, Cross breathed, timing the demonstration on his phone. The base record for that weapon is 24 seconds, set by a SEAL team instructor. Morrison found himself stepping back instinctively. 18-second field stripping wasn't just good, it was exceptional, even by special operations standards. Combined with her earlier combat demonstration and knowledge of security protocols, the evidence was painting a picture that made him deeply uncomfortable. Knox Rodriguez, the third retired veteran, leaned forward in his chair. "I've seen a lot of people handle weapons in 30 years of service," he said quietly. "That wasn't learned at a civilian gun range." Scarlett reassembled the weapon with the same fluid efficiency, conducted a function check, and handed it back to Blackwood with the barrel pointed safely away from any person. The entire demonstration had been conducted with textbook weapons safety protocols that were second nature only to people who lived and breathed firearms training. "Satisfied?" she asked, and Morrison caught something in her voice that suggested the question carried more weight than simple demonstration of competence. Tank, nursing his bruised pride and twisted arm, wasn't ready to concede defeat. So you know guns. Lots of people know guns. Doesn't make you military. You're right, Scarlett replied. But perhaps we should discuss what would constitute sufficient evidence of military training. The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Morrison recognized that they had reached a decision point where the situation would either de-escalate or explode into something with serious consequences for everyone involved. Cross, despite multiple warnings, couldn't resist pushing further. The facial recognition software just returned results, he announced, staring at his screen with growing excitement. And they're not at all what I expected. Cross, Morrison warned, I strongly advise against pursuing this further. No, wait, this is important, Cross insisted. The facial recognition isn't matching her to criminal databases or intelligence flags. It's matching her to, he paused, confusion evident in his voice, to military service records, multiple service records, from different branches, different countries. The revelation sent ripples of shock through the assembled crowd. Multiple military service records suggested either an incredibly sophisticated false identity operation or something else entirely that none of them were cleared to understand. Ember Vasquez looked at her coworker with new confusion. Scarlett, what's he talking about? Morrison's phone buzzed with an incoming call from base security. He answered quickly, listening to a voice that spoke with the clipped efficiency of military intelligence. When the call ended, he looked at Scarlett with something approaching recognition. Ma'am, he said formally, I've been instructed to inform you that your security status has been flagged at the highest levels. Colonel Helena Voss from Naval Intelligence is en route to assess the situation. Scarlett's reaction to the colonel's name was subtle but telling. A slight tightening around her eyes suggested recognition, and possibly concern about implications of official attention. Dr. Wells moved closer to the group, her psychological training telling her that the situation was approaching a critical point where someone's carefully maintained composure might crack under pressure. Comprehensive financial protection systems, utilized by active military personnel, required specialized insurance coverage that exceeded standard civilian policies. Premium military insurance packages provided complete coverage for deployment-related incidents, equipment replacement, and family protection benefits designed specifically for high-risk operational environments. These elite insurance frameworks included legal representation services and medical coverage that would be essential for personnel operating in sensitive military capacities. Blackwood, sensing that control of the situation was slipping away from him, made one final attempt to assert dominance. I don't care who's coming or what databases say. This woman used force against a United States Navy serviceman. That requires consequences. Actually, Morrison replied, his voice carrying the weight of experience and authority, what happened here was a textbook demonstration of appropriate force in response to unwanted physical contact. Any military court would recognize it as justified self-defense. Tank tried to object, but Morrison cut him off. You initiated physical contact with someone who had given you no legal justification for restraint. Her response was proportional and professional. Jake Murphy, emboldened by Morrison's support, stepped forward to defend his employee. Scarlett has been working here for 6 months without a single incident. She's respectful, professional, and has never given anyone cause for complaint. Blaze Garrison approached the group, his linguistic analysis complete. I need to report something, he said, his voice carrying the uncertainty of someone sharing information that might have serious implications. Her accent patterns don't match any single country of origin. They suggest multilingual training in a formal military environment. The sound of approaching vehicles outside made everyone turn toward the windows. Military police cars, but also unmarked sedans that suggested federal involvement. Whatever database flags Cross had triggered, they had attracted attention from people with serious authority. Scarlett straightened her posture, and Morrison noticed the subtle shift in her bearing. The submissive waitress persona had disappeared, replaced by something that looked remarkably like military bearing, professional, alert, ready for official scrutiny. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, addressing the room with quiet authority that hadn't been present before, I suggest you prepare yourselves for questions about tonight's events. Federal investigators take security breaches seriously, and unauthorized database inquiries may have crossed lines that carry significant consequences. The warning carried the weight of someone familiar with the consequences of unauthorized intelligence gathering. Morrison found himself wondering exactly what kind of clearance levels Scarlett possessed, and why someone with that level of access was working as a waitress in a civilian bar. The bar's front door opened to admit Colonel Helena Voss, followed by Agent Carter Reed from Naval Criminal Investigative Service and MP, Sergeant Davis with 2 military police officers. The combination of military intelligence, federal investigation, and military police meant that whatever had started as harassment had escalated into something requiring multiple agencies. Colonel Voss surveyed the scene with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to assessing complex situations quickly. Her gaze moved from the assembled SEALs to Morrison, to Scarlett, and finally to the crowd of witnesses with recording devices. "Master Chief Morrison," she said, her voice carrying formal authority, "I understand we have a situation involving unauthorized access to classified databases." Morrison straightened into attention automatically. "Yes, ma'am. Petty Officer Cross conducted database searches that triggered multiple security flags." Agent Reed approached Cross, who had gone pale under federal scrutiny. "Petty Officer Cross, you're required to surrender that computer immediately for examination by federal investigators. Your search history will be analyzed to determine what classified information may have been accessed." Cross looked toward Blackwood for support, but the lieutenant commander was beginning to understand that his authority carried no weight in a federal investigation. MP Sergeant Davis began establishing a security perimeter, clearing civilians from the immediate area while ensuring that key witnesses remained available for questioning. The professional efficiency suggested experience with situations involving classified material and potential security breaches. Morrison watched Scarlett's reaction to the arrival of official authority. Instead of relief or concern, she displayed what looked like professional recognition. Someone accustomed to operating at classification levels where normal rules didn't apply. Colonel Voss approached Scarlett with the measured stride of someone who understood the complexities of dealing with classified personnel. "Ms. Thornfield," she said, and Morrison caught the slight emphasis on the obvious alias. "I believe we need to discuss recent developments that have attracted federal attention." The familiar use of the alias, delivered with the confidence of someone who understood its significance, created a moment of electric tension. Morrison watched the exchange between two people who clearly shared context that excluded everyone else present. Tank, frustrated by conversations he couldn't follow and implications he didn't understand, decided to force the issue one final time. "Colonel, this woman assaulted a Navy SEAL. Whatever security issues there might be, assault is assault and requires response." Colonel Voss turned her attention to Tank with the kind of professional assessment that Morrison recognized as threat evaluation. "Chief Petty Officer Garrison, describe the circumstances of this alleged assault." Tank's recounting revealed his own role in initiating physical contact, undermining any claim of unprovoked attack. Morrison watched Voss process the information with the analytical precision of someone trained in operational assessment. "So to clarify," Voss said when Tank finished, "you physically restrained someone who had not threatened you, and when that person defended themselves using appropriate force, you consider that assault?" The legal implications hit Tank like a physical blow. Self-defense against unlawful restraint was not only justifiable but expected from anyone with military training. Agent Reed had secured Cross's laptop and was preparing paperwork for the federal investigation. "Petty Officer Cross, you'll need to accompany me for immediate debriefing regarding your database activities. This is not optional." Cross's protest died in his throat as the weight of federal attention settled on him. Morrison had seen young servicemen face this kind of scrutiny before, and it rarely ended well for careers or security clearances. Dr. Wells observed the official response with professional interest, noting the careful protocols being followed to contain potential classified information while protecting the rights of all parties involved. Blackwood, recognizing that the situation had moved beyond his control, attempted to salvage his position through formal military bearing. "Colonel, our actions were motivated by legitimate concerns about operational security. If this individual has been gathering intelligence about base operations under false pretenses—" "Lieutenant Commander," Voss interrupted, her tone carrying the kind of authority that ended careers, "your concerns about operational security might carry more weight if your own actions hadn't compromised security through unauthorized investigations." Morrison felt the dynamic shift as federal authority asserted itself over local military structure. Blackwood's rank meant nothing, when federal investigators were examining security breaches that potentially involved classified information. Ember Vasquez, still confused by the rapid escalation, approached Colonel Voss with the courage of someone defending a friend. "Ma'am, Scarlett has been nothing but professional during her time here. She's helped customers, worked extra shifts, and never caused any problems." Colonel Voss acknowledged the character reference with professional interest. "Thank you, Ms. Vasquez. Your observations will be noted in our assessment." Jake Murphy stepped forward to support his employee. "Colonel, Ms. Thornfield has been an exemplary worker. Whatever these men thought they were investigating, she's never given anyone cause for suspicion." The support from civilian witnesses who had observed Scarlett's behavior over months carried weight with Voss, who understood the value of long-term behavioral assessment in evaluating personnel. "The tension is building, and I can feel you getting invested in Scarlett's story. If you're curious about what that unit patch really means, show some love with a like. The next few minutes are going to blow your mind, so stick around." Agent Reed completed his preliminary assessment and approached Colonel Voss with results that would determine how the investigation proceeded. "Colonel, the database intrusions triggered multiple classified systems. We're dealing with potential exposure of information far above these individuals' clearance levels." The revelation confirmed Morrison's worst fears. When federal investigators started using terms like classified systems and clearance levels, careers ended and criminal charges became possibilities. Morrison made a decision that would follow him for the rest of his career. "Colonel," he said, drawing official attention he wasn't sure he wanted, "for the record, this woman defended herself appropriately against unwanted physical contact. Her actions were proportional and professional." The character reference from a respected Master Chief carried significant weight in military culture. Voss acknowledged Morrison's statement with the respect due to his rank and experience. Cross, facing the reality of federal investigation, tried one last desperate attempt to justify his actions. "Colonel, the database searches revealed multiple inconsistencies in her background, multiple military records from different countries, facial recognition matches that don't make sense." "Petty Officer Cross," Voss replied with icy precision, "your unauthorized access to classified systems is the security breach we're investigating. Whatever information you may think you discovered is now evidence in a federal case." The finality in Voss's tone made it clear that Cross's career was over. Unauthorized access to classified systems carried consequences that could include prison time, not just discharge from military service. Wells approached Colonel Voss with the careful deference of someone requesting permission to share professional observations. "Colonel, if I may, the behavioral patterns I've observed suggest that all parties involved may benefit from psychological evaluation to assess the impact of tonight's events." Voss considered the recommendation with the thoroughness of someone who understood the importance of psychological factors in classified operations. "Doctor, your professional assessment may indeed be valuable as we determine appropriate follow-up actions." Scarlett had remained silent during the official exchanges, but Morrison noticed subtle changes in her posture and bearing that suggested preparation for whatever came next. She looked like someone ready to face consequences she had anticipated. The crowd of witnesses had been reduced to essential personnel, but those remaining included several people with recording devices that had captured the entire confrontation. The viral potential of the footage would add complications to an already complex situation. MP Sergeant Davis completed his security assessment and reported to Colonel Voss. "Ma'am, the area is secure. We've identified all witnesses and confiscated devices with recordings pending investigation review." The thoroughness of the security response indicated that whatever Scarlett's true identity, her exposure had triggered protocols designed to protect classified information from public disclosure. Agent Reed returned from securing Cross's computer equipment with information that would reshape everyone's understanding of the situation. "Colonel, preliminary analysis suggests the database intrusions accessed information related to deep cover operations. This is bigger than simple security breach." Morrison felt his blood run cold. Deep cover operations meant intelligence activities at the highest levels of national security. The three SEALs who had started the evening by harassing a waitress had stumbled into something that could have international implications. Colonel Voss made a decision that would affect everyone involved. "Agent Reed, I'm declaring this a classified incident. All personnel present are bound by national security protocols regarding disclosure of tonight's events. The formal classification meant that discussing the incident could result in charges under the Espionage Act. Morrison understood that their casual evening at Murphy's Tap had become a matter of national security. Tank, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what they had triggered, attempted to minimize his role. "Colonel, we were just investigating suspected stolen valor. We never intended to compromise classified operations." "Chief Petty Officer Garrison," Voss replied, "intent is irrelevant when dealing with classified information. The consequences of your actions will be determined by appropriate authority." Blackwood, Cross, and Tank found themselves facing a very different situation than they had anticipated. Instead of exposing stolen valor, they had triggered a federal investigation that was now examining their own conduct and potentially compromising their security clearances. Ember Vasquez approached Scarlett with confusion and concern. "Scarlett, I don't understand what's happening. Are you in trouble?" Scarlett's response revealed the first crack in her carefully maintained cover. "Ember, I'm sorry you got involved in this. You should distance yourself from the situation for your own protection." The warning, delivered with genuine concern for her coworkers' well-being, suggested that Scarlett understood the potential consequences better than anyone else present. Jake Murphy faced the reality that his establishment had become the center of a classified incident that could affect his business license and relationship with the military community. "Colonel, I hope you understand that we had no knowledge of any classified matters. This is just a neighborhood bar." Colonel Voss acknowledged his concern with professional understanding. "Mr. Murphy, your cooperation will be noted. However, this facility may require security assessment given recent events." The implications for Murphy's Tap were serious. Classified incidents could result in loss of military clientele and ongoing security scrutiny that would fundamentally change the bar's operations. Advanced military education systems provided accelerated learning programs specifically designed for special operations personnel requiring rapid skill acquisition. Elite military training platforms offered comprehensive courses in tactical operations, advanced weaponry, and leadership development that met classified military standards. These sophisticated educational frameworks delivered professional military education with real-world application, featuring expert instruction and hands-on training scenarios. Dr. Wells completed her behavioral assessment and approached Colonel Voss with observations that could influence how the situation was resolved. "Colonel, based on my professional evaluation, Ms. Thornfield displays behavioral patterns consistent with advanced military training. Her responses to stress and confrontation suggest extensive experience in high-pressure situations." The psychological assessment confirmed what Morrison had suspected based on his own observations. Scarlett's behavior under pressure indicated training that went far beyond anything available to civilians. Agent Reed received communication from federal headquarters that would determine the next phase of the investigation. "Colonel, Washington wants immediate secure transport for all principals. This situation has attracted attention at the highest levels." Morrison understood that when federal investigations attracted attention from Washington, the consequences would extend far beyond the individuals immediately involved. National security cases had their own momentum and rarely ended quietly. But the most significant moment was yet to come. As federal agents prepared to escort everyone to separate vehicles for individual debriefing, Tank made one final fateful decision. Still humiliated by his earlier defeat and desperate to salvage his reputation in front of Hirsch recording phones, he lunged forward and grabbed Scarlett's shirt with both hands. "I don't care what kind of federal protection you have," he snarled, his massive frame towering over her. "You made me look like a fool, and I want answers." The fabric of Scarlett's gray work shirt, already stressed from the evening's confrontations, tore violently under Tank's aggressive grip. The sound of ripping cloth cut through the tense atmosphere like a gunshot, but it was nothing compared to the collective gasp that followed when the torn shirt revealed what lay beneath. Morrison's whiskey glass, which he had somehow retrieved during the chaos, slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers and shattered on the floor. The sound seemed to echo in the absolute silence that had fallen over Murphy's Tap. Exposed on Scarlett's shoulder, revealed by the torn fabric, was a unit patch that made every military professional present freeze in recognition and terror. The patch was unlike anything Morrison had seen in 28 years of service. Black background with silver thread that caught the bar's lights like moonlight on water. At the center, a trident, but not the familiar Navy SEAL trident. This one was different, more elaborate, with details that spoke of classification levels beyond anything carried by conventional special operations. Above the trident, in precise military lettering, DevGru. Below it, in smaller text that made Morrison's blood turn to ice, Trident Ghost. And at the bottom, coordinates that he recognized with growing horror as marking locations where operations had occurred that officially never happened. Before revealing Scarlett's identity that will shake the entire naval base, share this video now. The moment coming next will change everything. If you've ever been underestimated because of how you look, leave a like. This story is proof that quiet strength can change everything. Hit that thanks button if this story moved you. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough for every military professional present to process what they were seeing, short enough to feel like an eternity. Then Morrison moved. His 30 years of military discipline took over as he snapped to attention with parade ground precision, his right hand rising in the sharpest salute of his career. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. The reaction rippled outward like a shockwave. Blaise Garrison, the Navy linguist, stepped back so quickly he knocked over his bar stool. His face had gone white with recognition of insignia he had only heard whispered about in classified briefings. Wyatt Torres, Sterling Walsh, and Knox Rodriguez, 3 men who collectively had over 90 years of Navy service, rose from their table as one and stood at attention, their faces showing the kind of awe typically reserved for legends that had unexpectedly become real. "Holy mother of..." Sterling Walsh's voice trailed off as he realized he was looking at someone whose existence was so classified that acknowledging it publicly could end his security clearance. Cross had been reaching for his laptop when the patch was revealed. His hands froze in mid-motion, hovering over the keyboard as his mind struggled to process what his eyes were telling him. The databases he had been accessing, the security flags, the warnings about classification levels. Suddenly, it all made terrible sense. Dr. Wells found herself unconsciously stepping backward, her psychological training telling her she was in the presence of someone whose operational experience exceeded anything in her academic knowledge. But it was Tank's reaction that would be replayed millions of times across social media platforms in the hours that followed. His massive frame, which had been leaning forward aggressively, went rigid as understanding dawned. His hands, still gripping the torn fabric, began to shake as the implications of what he had just exposed crashed over him. That's DevGru," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "That's SEAL Team 6. Blackwood's response was immediate and devastating. His face drained of color so quickly that Dr. Wells moved instinctively closer, concerned about potential cardiac events. The cocky lieutenant commander who had started the evening by demanding respect from a waitress found himself face to face with someone who outranked him in ways that made conventional military hierarchy seem like children's games. "Trident Ghost," Blackwood read from the patch, his voice cracking with disbelief. Officially, that unit doesn't exist." Ember Vasquez looked between her coworker and the military personnel who had suddenly adopted positions of profound respect. "Scarlett," she said quietly, "I don't understand what's happening." Scarlett, whose bearing had shifted completely from submissive waitress to something that could only be described as command presence, surveyed the room with eyes that had seen operations in places that didn't appear on any public map. When she spoke, her voice carried none of the Russian accent that had marked her speech as a civilian employee. Instead, it held the quiet authority of someone accustomed to making decisions where hesitation could have global consequences. "DevGru authorization remains classified," she said, addressing the room with professional calm. "Level 7 clearance required for confirmation of operational details." The words hit Colonel Voss like a physical blow, confirming what the patch had already suggested. Level 7 clearance was so far above standard military classification that most senior officers never even knew it existed. Morrison found his voice, though it came out hoarse with emotion. "Ma'am, with your permission, I need to secure this area immediately. Unauthorized personnel should not be present for classified discussions." Scarlett, though Morrison now understood that name was as false as everything else about her cover identity, nodded approval. "Master Chief, that would be appropriate." The formal acknowledgement of Morrison's authority, delivered by someone whose actual rank was so classified it couldn't be spoken aloud, created a moment of surreal military protocol in the chaos of Murphy's Tap. Agent Reed, who had been preparing transport arrangements, found himself reassessing the entire situation as implications rippled through his understanding. Deep cover operations were serious enough, but DevGru personnel operating under civilian identities suggested missions with national security implications that reached the highest levels of government. Jake Murphy stood behind his bar, watching 6 months of casual interaction recontextualize itself in light of what the torn shirt had revealed. Every conversation, every shift worked. Every interaction with military personnel had potentially been part of an intelligence operation whose scope he couldn't begin to imagine. Tank, still holding the torn fabric that had exposed everything, seemed paralyzed by the magnitude of his error. "I didn't know," he whispered. "How could I have known?" "That," said Scarlett, her voice carrying undertones that suggested vast experience with the consequences of operational exposure, "was the point." The simple statement contained volumes about the nature of deep cover work, the sacrifice required to maintain false identities, and the price paid by people who serve their country in ways that would never be acknowledged or celebrated. Cross finally found the courage to close his laptop, understanding too late that every database query he had made had potentially compromised operations involving national security. His social media following, built on exposing stolen valor, had just inadvertently revealed someone whose service was so legitimate and so classified that exposing it constituted a federal crime. Colonel Voss approached with the careful respect due to someone whose operational authority exceeded her own despite the apparent rank difference. "Ma'am, I need to implement immediate damage control protocols. This exposure will require assessment at the highest levels." Scarlett acknowledged the reality with professional resignation. "Colonel, my current assignment is compromised beyond recovery. Extraction protocols should be initiated immediately." The conversation between two people operating at classification levels that excluded everyone else in the room made Morrison realize how far outside normal military experience this situation had moved. Blaze Garrison, his linguistic training finally allowing him to process what he had observed, spoke with growing understanding. The accent patterns, the multilingual indicators, that wasn't Russian training. That was intelligence community preparation for deep cover operations in hostile territory. The analysis confirmed what Morrison had suspected. Scarlett's 6 months at Murphy's Tap hadn't been employment. It had been a mission whose parameters none of them were cleared to understand. Dr. Wells found herself observing the psychological aftermath of an operations exposure, watching trained military personnel process the reality that they had spent months interacting with someone whose actual identity was protected by classification levels they couldn't access. MP Sergeant Davis received communication that would determine immediate security protocols. "Colonel, federal security teams are en route. We have orders to establish a classified perimeter and prepare for damage assessment." The arrival of federal security teams meant that Murphy's Tap was about to become the center of an intelligence operation designed to contain the consequences of Scarlett's exposure. Ember Vasquez, still struggling to understand her coworker's transformation, approached with confusion and concern. "Scarlett, 6 months we worked together. Were you ever really my friend?" The question cut through operational protocols to something deeply personal. Scarlett's response revealed the human cost of deep cover operations that required living false lives for extended periods. "Ember," she said, and for the first time her voice carried emotion that seemed genuine rather than tactical. The friendship was real. Everything else was necessary. The distinction between operational necessity and personal relationships highlighted the complex moral landscape of intelligence work, where protecting national security required deceiving people who had shown genuine kindness and loyalty. Jake Murphy faced the reality that his business had unknowingly hosted a classified operation for 6 months. "Ma'am, whatever your mission was, I hope it was successful. You were a good employee and a decent person." The character reference from someone who had observed her daily behavior carried weight that official assessments couldn't match. Morrison understood that successful deep cover operations required becoming genuinely liked and trusted by the community being infiltrated. Sterling Walsh, his 90 years of military experience giving him perspective on operational sacrifice, spoke with quiet respect. "Ma'am, whatever you did for your country, it wasn't easy. Living a false life for months takes a special kind of courage." The acknowledgement from a veteran who understood the cost of service created a moment of recognition, between warriors who had served in very different ways but with equal dedication. Tank, still reeling from the implications of his actions, tried to find words for an apology that could never adequately address the magnitude of his error. "Ma'am, I don't know how to make this right." Scarlett studied him with eyes that had seen much worse mistakes in much more dangerous circumstances. "Chief Garrison, you acted on the information available to you. The fault lies with whoever failed to provide adequate operational security briefings." The professional response, devoid of personal recrimination, suggested someone accustomed to dealing with the consequences of operational exposure without wasting energy on blame or anger. Cross, facing career-ending consequences for his database activities, found the courage to ask the question that had driven his investigation. "Ma'am, the multiple service records, the different countries, what was I actually looking at?" "Petty Officer Cross," Scarlett replied. "That information remains classified at levels that will never be accessible to your security clearance. Some questions are better left unasked." The answer confirmed that his database searches had accessed information far beyond anything he was authorized to see, with consequences that would follow him for the remainder of his military career. Federal security teams arrived with the efficiency of people experienced in containing classified exposures. The establishment of a security perimeter marked the end of Murphy's Tap as a civilian business and the beginning of its role as the center of a federal investigation. Morrison found himself wondering about the mission that had required 6 months of deep cover in a military bar, the intelligence that had been gathered, and the threats that had required such elaborate operational security. But those questions, like so many aspects of Scarlett's true identity, would remain classified at levels he would never access. The woman who had served drinks and cleaned tables while gathering intelligence about threats to national security would disappear into the same shadows that had originally concealed her. The torn shirt that had revealed everything lay discarded on the floor of Murphy's Tap, a piece of gray fabric that had exposed one of America's most classified warriors to scrutiny that would end her current mission and require extraction to safety that most civilians would never know they needed. As federal agents prepared to escort everyone to separate facilities for the debriefing that would determine their futures, Morrison understood that he had been privileged to witness something extraordinary, the moment when someone living under deep cover had been forced to choose between maintaining operational security and protecting herself from hostile interrogation. Scarlett had made her choice with the professional calculation that suggested extensive training in situations where cover maintenance had to be balanced against personal security. She had revealed just enough to survive the confrontation while concealing the full scope of whatever mission had brought her to Murphy's Tap. The evening that had started with a simple question about rank had revealed truths about service, sacrifice, and the hidden wars fought by people whose names would never appear in any history book that grateful civilians would ever read. The quiet woman who had served drinks while protecting secrets that kept America safe had finally been exposed, and the consequences would ripple through careers and operations in ways that none of them could fully understand. The arrival of federal security teams transformed Murphy's Tap from a neighborhood military hangout into the epicenter of a classified intelligence crisis. Morrison watched through the windows as unmarked vehicles surrounded the building, their occupants moving with the practiced efficiency of people who specialized in containing situations that officially never happened. The woman he had known as Scarlett Thornfield stood in the center of the chaos with an otherworldly calm that spoke of training in environments where exposure meant death rather than career embarrassment. Her torn shirt hung awkwardly, the trident ghost patch visible to everyone present, a piece of classified reality that had shattered the comfortable fiction of her civilian identity. Agent Reed coordinated the security response with military precision, his earlier assessment of a simple database breach having evolved into something requiring resources normally reserved for protecting national assets. "Colonel Voss," he said, approaching with a secure communication device, "Washington is implementing Protocol 7. This situation now falls under Department of Defense Special Access programs." Morrison had never heard of Protocol 7, but Colonel Voss's immediate stiffening told him it represented authority that superseded normal military command structure. The federal investigation had just become something else entirely. "Roger that," Voss replied, accepting the communication device with the gravity of someone who understood the implications. "All civilian personnel will need to be processed through enhanced security protocols." Tank, still holding the torn fabric that had exposed everything, finally released his grip and stepped back as if the material had become radioactive. The massive SEAL who had dominated the evening through physical intimidation now appeared diminished, his earlier confidence replaced by the growing realization that his actions had triggered consequences reaching the highest levels of government. Cross had closed his laptop completely, understanding too late that his database searches had accessed information that could compromise operations involving American lives in hostile territory. His social media presence, built on exposing false military claims, would now become evidence in a federal case examining his unauthorized access to classified systems. Blackwood attempted to reassert some measure of control over the deteriorating situation. "Colonel, with respect, this began as a legitimate investigation into suspected stolen valor. Whatever security issues may have arisen, our original concerns were valid." The statement drew a look from Scarlett that Morrison found more chilling than any verbal response could have been. It was the kind of professional assessment that suggested someone evaluating whether the speaker represented a continued security threat. "Lieutenant Commander," Voss replied with icy precision, "your legitimate investigation has potentially compromised a classified operation involving national security. Your original concerns are now irrelevant compared to the damage you may have caused." The rebuke delivered in front of enlisted personnel and civilians represented a career-defining moment that would follow Blackwood regardless of how the investigation concluded. Morrison had seen promising officers destroyed by less significant failures in judgment. Dr. Wells approached Colonel Voss with the careful deference of someone requesting permission to continue her professional assessment. "Colonel, given the psychological stress evident in all parties, I recommend immediate evaluation to prevent potential security risks arising from emotional instability." The suggestion carried weight beyond simple mental health concerns. In classified operations, psychological breakdown could lead to security breaches with consequences far beyond the individuals involved. Ember Vasquez remained near Scarlett despite the obvious risks of association with someone at the center of a federal investigation. "Scarlett, I still don't understand what's happening, but I want you to know that whatever you really are, you were always kind to me." The loyalty from someone who had worked alongside her for months without knowing her true identity highlighted the human cost of deep cover operations. Scarlett had been required to form genuine relationships while concealing fundamental truths about herself. "Ember," Scarlett replied, and Morrison caught the slight softening in her voice that suggested real emotion beneath operational discipline. "Your friendship meant more than you know. In this work, authentic human connection becomes precious because it's so rare." Jake Murphy faced the reality that his establishment had unknowingly hosted a classified intelligence operation whose exposure could have international implications. "Ma'am, whatever brought you here, I hope it was worth the sacrifice. You were one of the best employees I've ever had." The character reference from someone who had observed her daily behavior for 6 months carried more weight than any official assessment could provide. Morrison understood that successful deep cover required becoming genuinely trusted by the community being observed. Sterling Walsh, his decades of military experience providing perspective on operational sacrifice, spoke with quiet respect. "Ma'am, living a false life for your country takes courage most people never develop. Whatever your real name is, you served with honor." The acknowledgement from a veteran who understood the cost of service created a moment of recognition between warriors separated by classification levels but united by dedication to protecting American interests. Knox Rodriguez approached with the careful respect of someone addressing a legend he had never expected to encounter. "Ma'am, my unit served in Afghanistan in 2012. We heard rumors about operations that saved American lives but never appeared in any official record. Was that your unit's work?" Scarlett's response carried the weight of someone who had participated in missions whose success was measured by lives saved rather than public recognition. Special operations personnel make sacrifices every day that never receive acknowledgement. Your service and theirs protected Americans who will never know they needed protection. The diplomatic non-answer confirmed operational involvement while protecting classified details. Morrison recognized the careful balance between honoring service and maintaining security that characterized interactions at the highest levels of special operations. Federal security personnel completed their assessment of Murphy's tap and began implementing protocols designed to contain the exposure of classified information. The establishment that had served as a gathering place for military personnel would now require extensive security review before it could resume normal operations. Agent Reed received updated instructions that would determine how the investigation proceeded. Colonel, enhanced interrogation teams are en route. Everyone present will undergo individual assessment to determine their knowledge of classified information and potential security risks. Morrison understood that enhanced interrogation in the context of national security meant questioning by specialists trained to extract information while assessing the psychological stability of witnesses to classified events. Blaise Garrison, his linguistic analysis complete, shared observations that could influence how the security assessment proceeded. Colonel, based on my professional evaluation, Ms. Thornfield's speech patterns indicate multilingual training consistent with intelligence community preparation for extended deep cover operations. The confirmation of intelligence community involvement elevated the situation beyond military jurisdiction into territory governed by agencies whose authority superseded normal command structure. Cross, facing the reality of federal charges for unauthorized access to classified systems, attempted one final justification for his actions. Colonel, the database anomalies I discovered suggested sophisticated identity manipulation. My investigation was motivated by legitimate security concerns. Petty Officer Cross, Agent Reed interjected with federal authority, your unauthorized access to classified databases is a federal crime regardless of your motivations. Your security clearance is revoked effective immediately, and you will remain in federal custody pending investigation. The finality of federal intervention marked the end of Cross's military career and the beginning of legal proceedings that could result in imprisonment for violations of the Espionage Act. Dr. Wells completed her preliminary psychological assessment and reported findings that could influence security protocols. Colonel, based on behavioral observation, all parties display stress responses consistent with exposure to classified information beyond their clearance levels. Ongoing psychological support may be necessary to prevent security risks arising from emotional instability. The psychological assessment confirmed that everyone present had been exposed to classified information that could compromise national security if disclosed inappropriately. Tank, finally finding words for the magnitude of his error, approached Scarlett with the humility of someone recognizing the consequences of his actions. Ma'am, I don't know how to apologize for compromising your mission. My pride cost you 6 months of work and potentially endangered lives. Scarlett studied him with eyes that had seen much worse mistakes in much more dangerous circumstances. Chief Garrison, operational security failures occur at every level. The responsibility lies with the system that failed to provide adequate protection for classified personnel, not with individuals acting on incomplete information. The professional response, devoid of personal recrimination, suggested someone trained to deal with operational setbacks without wasting energy on blame or anger. Morrison recognized the kind of leadership that focused on solutions rather than fault assignment. Wyatt Torres, his decades of Navy service providing perspective on the gravity of the situation, spoke with quiet understanding. Ma'am, we may not understand the full scope of what happened here, but we recognize that you sacrificed 6 months of your life serving your country in ways we can't comprehend. The acknowledgement from veterans who understood the cost of service created a moment of respect that transcended rank and classification levels. Colonel Voss received communication that would determine the immediate response to the security breach. Agent Reed, Pentagon directives require immediate extraction of the compromised asset and implementation of damage assessment protocols. This situation now involves potential threats to ongoing operations in multiple theaters. The revelation that Scarlett's exposure could affect operations worldwide confirmed Morrison's growing understanding that they had stumbled into something far beyond their comprehension. Federal extraction teams arrived with resources that suggested preparation for protecting high-value intelligence assets under hostile conditions. The level of security being implemented indicated that Scarlett's true identity and mission involved threats that required military-grade protection. Ma'am, Colonel Voss addressed Scarlett with formal respect, extraction protocols are now in effect. Your safety and the security of ongoing operations require immediate relocation to a secure facility. Scarlett nodded acknowledgement, her bearing shifting from the relaxed posture of a civilian employee to the alert readiness of someone prepared for tactical movement. Colonel, I understand the necessity. 6 months of intelligence gathering will require extensive debriefing to assess operational value. The casual reference to 6 months of intelligence work confirmed that her employment at Murphy's Tap had been an active mission whose scope none of the witnesses were cleared to understand. Ember Vasquez approached for what would likely be their final interaction, confusion and concern evident in her expression. "Scarlett, will I ever see you again?" The question highlighted the personal cost of deep cover operations that required severing relationships formed during extended assignments. Scarlett's response revealed the emotional sacrifice demanded by intelligence work. "Ember, the nature of my work makes continuing relationships difficult, but I want you to know that your friendship provided something genuine in a world where authenticity is often impossible." The farewell carried emotional weight that suggested real attachment formed despite operational necessity. Morrison understood that successful deep cover required maintaining human connections while preparing for their eventual termination. Jake Murphy faced the end of Scarlett's employment with the recognition that his business had unknowingly participated in protecting national security. "Ma'am, whatever your real name is, you'll always have a job here if you ever need one." The offer, delivered despite the complications her presence had brought, demonstrated the kind of loyalty that successful deep cover operations required from civilian contacts. Morrison found himself wondering about the intelligence that 6 months of observation had produced, the threats that had required such elaborate security measures, and the operations that might be affected by Scarlett's exposure. Federal security teams completed their assessment and began preparations for transporting all witnesses to facilities equipped for classified debriefings. The scope of the security response indicated that everyone present would undergo extensive questioning about their knowledge and observations. Agent Reed coordinated the complex logistics of managing multiple witnesses to a classified incident. "Colonel, individual transport has been arranged for each witness. Interrogation schedules will be determined based on security clearance levels and potential exposure to classified information." Morrison understood that he faced days or possibly weeks of questioning about 6 months of observations that had unknowingly documented an active intelligence operation. Cross was escorted to a separate vehicle, his status having changed from witness to federal prisoner facing charges for unauthorized access to classified systems. His laptop and all associated equipment had been secured as evidence in what would likely become a lengthy federal prosecution. Tank and Blackwood found themselves facing career-ending consequences that extended beyond simple disciplinary action into territory involving national security violations. Their unauthorized investigation had potentially compromised operations involving American lives. Dr. Wells would accompany the group to provide psychological support during interrogations that could last for days as federal investigators attempted to assess the scope of potential security breaches. The convoy of federal vehicles prepared to depart Murphy's Tap, leaving behind an establishment that would require extensive security assessment before it could resume operations. The neighborhood military hangout had become a crime scene, requiring analysis by specialists in classified information protection. As federal agents escorted Scarlett toward her transport, Morrison felt compelled to offer final words to someone whose service he was only beginning to understand. "Ma'am, whatever your mission was, thank you for your sacrifice. Those of us who witnessed your exposure will carry that knowledge with appropriate respect." Scarlett paused, looking back at the group of military personnel who had unknowingly documented her activities for 6 months. "Master Chief, your discretion and that of your colleagues will determine whether 6 months of intelligence work retains operational value. That responsibility may be more important than my individual mission." The statement revealed that the consequences of exposure extended far beyond her personal safety, to include the protection of intelligence that could affect ongoing operations worldwide. Agent Reed provided final instructions before departure. All personnel are reminded that discussing tonight's events constitutes a violation of federal law. The classified nature of this incident requires absolute discretion until formal debriefing is complete. Morrison understood that their casual evening at Murphy's Tap had become a federal case involving national security implications that would follow all of them permanently. The convoy departed into the night, leaving Murphy's Tap empty except for federal security personnel who would spend days analyzing every aspect of the establishment for potential security vulnerabilities. Morrison rode in silence toward an uncertain future, his mind processing 6 months of observations that had documented an active intelligence operation without his knowledge. Every conversation, every interaction, Every seemingly innocent exchange would now be examined by specialists trained to extract intelligence from civilian observations. The federal facility where they were transported resembled a corporate office complex rather than a detention center, but Morrison recognized the sophisticated security measures that marked it as a place where classified information was protected at the highest levels. Individual interrogation rooms had been prepared for each witness, with specialists assigned based on security clearance levels and potential exposure to classified information. The scope of the debriefing operation indicated that federal authorities were taking no chances with information that could compromise national security. Morrison found himself in a sterile interview room, equipped with recording devices and communication systems that suggested his statements would be analyzed by multiple agencies. The interrogator who entered was a civilian whose professional demeanor suggested extensive experience with classified investigations. Master Chief Morrison, I'm Special Agent Sarah Cross with the Defense Intelligence Agency. I understand you observed the individual known as Scarlett Thornfield for approximately 6 months while she maintained cover at Murphy's Tap. Morrison straightened automatically, recognizing that he faced questioning by specialists whose authority superseded military command structure. Yes, ma'am. I was a regular patron of the establishment during her period of employment. Master Chief, I need you to understand that your observations may have documented an active intelligence operation involving national security. Your cooperation in reconstructing those 6 months could be vital to protecting ongoing missions and American lives. The gravity of the situation settled over Morrison as he realized that his casual evening conversations and routine observations had unknowingly recorded activities that could affect operations worldwide. Ma'am, I'll provide any assistance necessary to protect national security, Ms. Thornfield conducted herself with professionalism that now makes perfect sense given her actual identity. Agent Cross activated recording equipment and began the systematic process of extracting 6 months of observations that would be analyzed by intelligence specialists for operational value. Master Chief, let's begin with your first encounter with the subject. I need you to recall every detail, no matter how insignificant it might seem. Morrison understood that he faced hours or possibly days of questioning, designed to reconstruct an intelligence operation whose scope he was only beginning to comprehend. In a separate facility, Scarlett underwent debriefing by specialists trained to extract intelligence from deep cover operations while protecting the psychological welfare of operatives who had lived false identities for extended periods. The debriefing room was designed to provide comfort rather than intimidation, recognition that intelligence gathering required cooperation rather than coercion from operatives returning from extended assignments. "Welcome back, Ghost 7, said the woman who entered, using Scarlett's operational designation rather than any of her cover identities. "I'm Dr. Rachel Hayes, and I'll be conducting your reintegration assessment." Scarlett acknowledged the formal recognition of her true identity with relief that suggested the emotional cost of maintaining false personas for extended periods. Dr. Hayes, 6 months of deep cover produced significant intelligence about potential security vulnerabilities in the military community. Ghost 7, before we discuss operational results, I need to assess your psychological condition after extended exposure to hostile interrogation and forced identity revelation. Deep cover operations carry risks that extend beyond physical security. The psychological assessment confirmed that intelligence agencies understood the mental health risks associated with living false identities while gathering information about potential threats to national security. Doctor, the mission parameters were successfully maintained until exposure became unavoidable. The intelligence gathered justifies the operational risks involved. Dr. Hayes began the systematic process of helping an operative transition from deep cover back to her authentic identity while preserving the psychological stability necessary for continued service. Ghost 7, reconstruction of your true identity will take time. 6 months of living as Scarlett Thornfield created neural pathways that require careful management to prevent identity confusion. The clinical explanation revealed the sophisticated understanding of psychological factors that intelligence agencies had developed through decades of managing deep cover operations. Meanwhile, Tank faced interrogation designed to assess his role in exposing a classified operation and determine whether his actions had been influenced by hostile intelligence services. The interrogation room was equipped with stress analysis equipment and recording devices that could detect deception while evaluating the psychological state of someone who had inadvertently compromised national security. Chief Petty Officer Garrison, I'm Agent Michael Stone with the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Your actions tonight resulted in the exposure of a classified intelligence operation. I need to understand your motivations and assess whether you represent a continued security risk. Tank straightened despite his emotional distress, recognizing the gravity of formal investigation by federal authorities. Sir, my actions were motivated by concern about stolen valor. I never intended to compromise legitimate intelligence operations. Chief Garrison, intent is less important than results when dealing with national security. Your physical assault on a deep cover operative could have endangered not only her life, but ongoing missions involving American personnel worldwide. The explanation confirmed that Tank's actions had consequences extending far beyond the immediate incident at Murphy's Tap. Sir, I understand the magnitude of my error. If my actions have endangered American lives, I accept full responsibility for the consequences. Agent Stone began the systematic evaluation designed to determine whether Tank's actions represented simple judgment failure or something more serious that could threaten national security. Chief Garrison, we need to reconstruct your thought process during the confrontation to assess whether you were influenced by factors beyond personal pride and military culture. Tank faced questioning that would determine whether his military career could continue or whether his security clearance violations required permanent exclusion from classified work. Cross underwent interrogation focused on his database activities and the sophisticated computer skills he had used to access classified information without authorization. The interrogation facility included cybersecurity specialists who could analyze his digital activities while assessing whether his actions represented individual initiative or coordination with hostile intelligence services. Petty Officer Cross, I'm Agent Lisa Park with the FBI's Counterintelligence Division. Your unauthorized access to classified databases represents a serious violation of federal law with potential implications for national security. Cross faced the reality that his computer expertise, previously used to expose false military claims, had inadvertently accessed information that could compromise ongoing operations involving American lives. Ma'am, my database searches were motivated by suspicion about identity irregularities. I never intended to access classified information beyond my clearance level. Petty Officer Cross, the sophistication of your database intrusions suggests capabilities that exceed normal technical training. Where did you acquire the skills necessary to access classified systems? The question revealed federal concern that Cross's abilities might have been enhanced through training provided by hostile intelligence services seeking to recruit assets within the military. Ma'am, my technical skills were developed through personal interest and military training. I've never received instruction from unauthorized sources or foreign entities. Agent Park began the complex process of determining whether Cross represented a national security threat or simply an overzealous individual whose technical abilities had exceeded his judgment. Petty Officer Cross, your social media presence and history of investigating military claims will be thoroughly examined to determine whether your actions tonight were consistent with previous behavior patterns. Cross understood that every aspect of his digital life would undergo analysis by specialists trained to detect foreign intelligence recruitment and influence operations. Blackwood faced interrogation designed to assess his leadership failures and determine whether his actions had been influenced by factors beyond personal pride and military culture. The interrogation room was equipped with analysis equipment designed to evaluate the psychological state of military officers whose judgment failures had potentially compromised national security operations. Lieutenant Commander Blackwood, I'm Colonel James Mitchell with the Defense Intelligence Agency. Your unauthorized investigation triggered the exposure of a classified operation. I need to assess your decision-making process and determine whether you represent a continued security risk. Blackwood attempted to maintain military bearing, despite facing investigation by authorities whose ranks exceeded his own. Colonel, my actions were motivated by legitimate concerns about operational security. The subject's behavior raised flags that warranted investigation. Lieutenant Commander, your concerns might have been legitimate if pursued through proper channels. Instead, you conducted an unauthorized investigation that potentially compromised operations involving American lives worldwide. The explanation confirmed that Blackwood's leadership failures had consequences extending far beyond his immediate command responsibility. Colonel, I understand that my judgment was flawed. However, the security indicators that prompted my investigation were real and warranted some form of response. Colonel Mitchell began evaluating whether Blackwood's actions represented correctable leadership failures or fundamental character flaws that would prevent continued service in sensitive positions. Lieutenant Commander, your capacity for command decisions involving classified information will be thoroughly evaluated to determine your fitness for continued service at your current rank. Blackwood faced the reality that his military career would be defined by a single evening's poor judgment that had exposed one of America's most classified warriors. Dr. Wells underwent debriefing designed to extract psychological observations that could provide intelligence value while assessing her reliability as a witness to classified events. The debriefing room was equipped with recording devices and analysis equipment designed to evaluate the psychological state of civilians who had been exposed to classified information beyond their security clearance. Dr. Wells, I'm Agent David Rodriguez with the Central Intelligence Agency. Your psychological training provided you with unique insights into tonight's events. I need to understand your observations and assess your reliability as a witness. Dr. Wells recognized that her professional expertise had made her observations valuable to intelligence agencies, while also making her a potential security risk. Agent Rodriguez, my psychological training allowed me to observe behavioral patterns that confirmed advanced military training in the individual known as Scarlett Thornfield. Her responses to stress were consistent with extensive experience in high-pressure situations. Dr. Wells, your professional assessment could provide valuable intelligence about deep cover operations and their psychological effects. However, your exposure to classified information creates security concerns that require careful management. The explanation confirmed that Dr. Wells faced ongoing security oversight as a civilian who had witnessed classified intelligence operations. Agent Rodriguez, I understand the security implications of my observations. I'm prepared to cooperate fully with any measures necessary to protect national security. Agent Rodriguez began the systematic extraction of psychological observations that could provide intelligence value while implementing security measures to prevent unauthorized disclosure. Jake Murphy underwent questioning designed to extract information about 6 months of hosting a classified intelligence operation while assessing his suitability for continued association with military personnel. The interview room was designed for civilian comfort while incorporating security measures necessary for protecting classified information during debriefing sessions. Mr. Murphy, I'm Agent Jennifer White with the Defense Intelligence Agency. Your establishment unknowingly hosted a classified intelligence operation for 6 months. I need to understand your observations and assess any security implications for continued operation. Jake faced the reality that his business had become part of an intelligence operation whose exposure could affect his relationship with the military community. Agent White, Ms. Thornfield was an exemplary employee who conducted herself with professionalism that now makes sense given her actual identity. I never suspected her civilian persona was anything other than authentic. Mr. Murphy, your character assessment of the operative provides valuable intelligence about the effectiveness of deep cover operations. However, the exposure of classified activities at your establishment raises security concerns about continued military patronage. The explanation confirmed that Murphy's TAP would require extensive security review before it could resume normal operations serving military personnel. Agent White, I'm prepared to cooperate fully with any security measures necessary to maintain the trust of the military community. My establishment has always supported service members, and I want to continue that mission. Agent White began assessing whether Murphy's TAP could continue operating as a gathering place for military personnel, or whether the security breach required permanent changes to its clientele and operations. Ember Vasquez faced questioning designed to extract observations about her co-workers' behavior while assessing her reliability and discretion regarding classified information. The interview room was designed to minimize intimidation while incorporating security measures necessary for protecting classified information during civilian debriefings. Ms. Vasquez, I'm Agent Blake Harper with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You worked closely with the individual known as Scarlett Thornfield for 6 months. I need to understand your observations and assess your discretion regarding classified information. Ember faced the reality that her friendship with Scarlett had inadvertently involved her in a classified intelligence operation with potential implications for national security. Agent Harper, Scarlett was always professional and helpful. She worked extra shifts, helped customers with respect, and never caused any problems. I never suspected she was anything other than what she appeared to be. Ms. Vasquez, your close working relationship with the operative provides valuable intelligence about the human dynamics of deep cover operations. However, your knowledge of classified information requires ongoing security oversight. The explanation confirmed that Ember would face permanent monitoring as a civilian who had unknowingly participated in an intelligence operation. Agent Harper, I don't fully understand what happened tonight, but I know Scarlett was a good person who treated everyone with kindness. If she was serving her country, then I'm proud to have known her. Agent Harper began the systematic process of extracting observations while implementing security measures to prevent unauthorized disclosure of information that could compromise ongoing operations. The 3 retired veterans underwent joint debriefing designed to extract their military expertise while assessing their discretion regarding the classified information they had witnessed. The debriefing room was equipped with recording devices and analysis equipment designed to evaluate the reliability of witnesses whose military experience provided unique insights into classified operations. Gentlemen, I'm Colonel Susan Martinez with the Defense Intelligence Agency. Your combined military experience provides valuable perspective on tonight's events. I need to understand your observations and assess your reliability as witnesses to classified activities. Wyatt Torres, Sterling Walsh, and Knox Rodriguez faced questioning by authorities who recognized that their decades of service had given them insights unavailable to civilian witnesses. Colonel, our collective experience allowed us to recognize signs of advanced military training that civilian observers might miss, Wyatt Torres replied. The individuals' bearing and responses were consistent with special operations background. Gentlemen, your military expertise makes your observations valuable for intelligence assessment while also making you potential security risks due to your ability to analyze classified information. The explanation confirmed that their military experience had made them both valuable witnesses and ongoing security concerns for intelligence agencies. Colonel, we understand the security implications of tonight's events, Sterling Walsh added. Our service taught us the importance of discretion when dealing with classified information. Colonel Martinez began the systematic extraction of military insights while implementing security measures designed to prevent unauthorized disclosure by veterans whose experience allowed them to understand the significance of what they had witnessed. Federal analysts worked through the night processing initial debriefing reports and assessing the scope of the security breach caused by Scarlett's exposure at Murphy's Tap. The analysis facility was equipped with sophisticated computer systems and communication networks that allowed real-time coordination between multiple intelligence agencies working to assess the damage. Initial reports confirmed that Ghost 7's cover was completely blown through physical exposure of classified insignia, reported Agent Sarah Cross to the coordinating team. All witnesses have been secured for enhanced debriefing. The preliminary assessment confirmed that Scarlett's 6 months of intelligence gathering had been compromised through a sequence of events that began with casual harassment and escalated to federal investigation. Analysis of database intrusions indicates that Petty Officer Cross accessed classified information about multiple ongoing operations, added Agent Lisa Park. His technical capabilities exceeded his security clearance by several levels. The cybersecurity assessment revealed that Cross's unauthorized database activities had potentially compromised operations far beyond the single incident at Murphy's Tap. Psychological evaluation suggests that all military personnel acted within expected behavioral parameters for their training and experience, Dr. Hayes reported. No evidence of foreign influence or coordination has been detected. The psychological assessment provided initial reassurance that the security breach represented individual judgment failures rather than coordinated intelligence operations by hostile foreign services. Damage assessment will require detailed analysis of Ghost 7's intelligence product and evaluation of compromised operational security measures, Colonel Mitchell concluded. This incident will influence deep cover protocols for years to come. The federal response confirmed that Scarlett's exposure had created consequences extending far beyond the immediate incident to include review of intelligence operations worldwide. As dawn approached, federal investigators continued the complex process of assessing a security breach that had exposed one of America's most classified warriors while potentially compromising operations involving American lives in hostile territories worldwide. The interrogations would continue for days, as specialists worked to extract every detail of 6 months of intelligence gathering, while protecting the security of ongoing operations that depended on the discretion of ordinary Americans who had unknowingly witnessed extraordinary service. Morrison sat in his sterile interview room, understanding that his casual observations of a waitress who cleaned tables and served drinks had documented an active intelligence operation whose scope he was only beginning to comprehend. The woman he had known as Scarlett Thornfield had spent 6 months gathering intelligence about potential threats to national security while maintaining a cover identity so convincing that even experienced military personnel had accepted her civilian persona without question. Her exposure through a torn shirt and revealed unit patch had ended an operation that might have protected American lives through intelligence that would now require careful evaluation to determine its continuing value. The federal investigation would determine whether 6 months of sacrifice and service could still contribute to protecting Americans from threats they would never know existed, carried out by people whose names would never appear in any history book they would ever read. As the sun rose over the federal facility where they were being debriefed, Morrison reflected on an evening that had begun with casual military harassment and revealed the hidden warriors who served their country in ways that required living false lives while gathering intelligence about threats to national security. The quiet woman who had served drinks at Murphy's Tap while protecting secrets that kept America safe had been exposed, but her sacrifice and that of countless others like her continued in shadows where ordinary Americans were protected by extraordinary people whose service would never receive the recognition it deserved. Meanwhile, in a secure facility hundreds of miles away, analysts worked to extract operational value from 6 months of intelligence gathering that had been compromised but not entirely lost through the professionalism of an operative who had maintained her mission even under hostile interrogation. Ghost 7's debriefing would take weeks as specialists worked to understand the threats she had identified and the intelligence she had gathered about vulnerabilities in the military community that could be exploited by hostile foreign services. Her cover identity as Scarlett Thornfield was permanently compromised, but the intelligence she had gathered about potential security breaches and foreign influence operations would continue protecting Americans long after her extraction from Murphy's Tap. The federal investigation would ultimately conclude that a single evening's poor judgment by military personnel had exposed a classified warrior but had not compromised the broader intelligence mission that protected American lives worldwide. The lessons learned from Ghost 7's exposure would influence security protocols and operational procedures for deep cover operations, ensuring that future intelligence gathering could continue protecting Americans from threats they would never know existed. 3 months later, Morrison received a letter on official government letterhead thanking him for his discretion and cooperation during a classified investigation involving national security. The letter was signed by someone whose title he didn't recognize and whose authority he couldn't question. Murphy's Tap reopened under new management with enhanced security measures and a clientele that seemed somehow different from the military personnel who had gathered there during Scarlett's 6 months of service. A small plaque near the bar honored the quiet professionals who served their country in ways that can never be acknowledged, a tribute to warriors whose sacrifice would never receive public recognition. Morrison never saw Scarlett again, but sometimes when reading about international incidents that didn't escalate into conflicts, he wondered if her intelligence work had helped prevent threats that ordinary Americans would never know they had faced. The torn gray shirt that had exposed one of America's most classified warriors became evidence in a federal case that would remain sealed for decades, a piece of fabric that had revealed the hidden cost of protecting freedom through service that could never be publicly honored. Years later, when Morrison had retired and could reflect on his career with the perspective that came from survival, he would remember the night at Murphy's Tap as the moment he understood that the most important battles were fought by people whose existence was never acknowledged, and whose victories were measured by threats that never materialized rather than conflicts that were won. The woman who had called herself Scarlett Thornfield had been exceptional, not because of her combat skills or intelligence training, but because she had spent 6 months living as someone she wasn't while gathering intelligence that kept Americans safe from people who would use that information to harm them. Morrison's respect for her had everything to do with the professional competence she had displayed while enduring harassment from people who assumed she was weaker than she appeared, and nothing to do with rank or clearance levels. True strength, he had learned, often wore the disguise of vulnerability, and real warriors sometimes fought their most important battles while pretending to be civilians serving drinks in military bars where ordinary Americans gathered, never knowing they were protected by extraordinary people whose sacrifice would never appear in any history book they would ever read. The story ended not with recognition or justice, but with the kind of quiet disappearance that marks successful completion of missions that officially never happened, carried out by people who officially didn't exist, protecting Americans who would never know they needed protection. Ghost 7 had vanished into whatever shadows had originally concealed her, leaving behind only questions about identity, duty, and the price of keeping secrets that protected people who would never know they were in danger from threats that could only be countered by warriors whose names would never be spoken aloud, but whose service would continue protecting freedom long after their individual missions had ended. In the classified archives where Ghost 7's mission would be recorded for historical analysis available only to future intelligence professionals, her service at Murphy's Tap would be remembered as an example of the dedication required to protect American lives through intelligence gathering that could never be publicly acknowledged. The intelligence she had gathered about potential security vulnerabilities would continue protecting military personnel for years, preventing foreign exploitation of weaknesses she had identified during 6 months of careful observation. Her willingness to maintain cover even under hostile interrogation had demonstrated the kind of professionalism that kept classified operations secure while gathering intelligence necessary to protect American interests worldwide. The federal investigation had concluded that her exposure, while regrettable, had not compromised the broader intelligence mission that protected American lives through operations that officially never happened. Future deep cover operatives would benefit from lessons learned through her experience, ensuring that intelligence gathering could continue protecting Americans from threats they would never know existed. The quiet woman who had served drinks while gathering intelligence about threats to national security had disappeared into the shadows, where America's most classified warriors continued their missions, protecting freedom through service that would never receive the recognition it deserved, but would always be remembered by the Americans whose lives they had saved through sacrifice that could never be publicly honored. The evening at Murphy's Tap that had begun with a simple question about rank had revealed truths about service, sacrifice, and the hidden wars fought by people whose names would never appear in any public record, but whose dedication to protecting American lives would continue long after their individual stories had been forgotten by everyone except the intelligence professionals who understood the true cost of freedom. Ghost 7's mission had ended, but her service continued in the shadows, where America's most classified warriors carried out the missions that kept ordinary Americans safe from extraordinary threats, protected by people whose existence could never be acknowledged, but whose sacrifice would never be forgotten by those who understood the true price of the freedom they defended.